The cold hit me before I even opened my eyes. The radiator in the corner hadn't clicked on all night again, and the chill had settled deep into the walls of our small apartment on the edge of Ridgewater. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, the edge brushing against the sweater that still hung on the chair beside the bed. It was Mara's lavender-colored, soft, slightly stretched at the sleeves where she used to push them up. Even now, the faint scent of her favorite fabric softener lingered. I could still picture her in it, brushing flour off her cheek in the kitchen or chasing Nova around the living room. That memory, like so many others, burned when it came, but I never tried to stop them. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked to the small kitchen, the kind of open layout that never really gave any space to breathe. I started the coffee, then rubbed my eyes and prepared for the morning rush. Nova was already awake, babbling in her crib. Elliot was curled under his blanket on the couch, watching the morning cartoons with the volume turned low. "Is Mom still sick?" he asked without looking at me. My hand froze over the cereal box. That question came every few weeks now. Sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while brushing teeth. "No, bud," I said quietly. "She's not sick anymore." I waited, but he didn't ask the next question. Not today. The kitchen window showed a gray city sky. Foggy, like it always was in Ridgewater this time of year. We lived on the 4th floor of an aging building, its bricks blackened by years of soot from the nearby industrial plants. Everything always felt covered in a thin layer of dust inside and out. I dressed the kids and grabbed their bags. As I zipped up Nova's jacket, a memory rushed forward. Mara laughing on a picnic blanket under a tree at Summerwell Park, the sun catching in her hair, the kids crawling all over her. I blinked hard, chasing it away. The photo we took that day still sat on the shelf in the hallway. I'd stopped looking at it for too long. At work, things weren't much better. The warehouse was loud and full of movement, but none of it seemed to touch me. I moved boxes, I stacked shelves. I signed off invoices, all with a blank kind of focus, like watching myself from outside. No one mentioned Mara. They hadn't for months. People didn't know what to say. Except Harper. She was new. Moved to Ridgewater last month, transferred from the coast. She was the kind of person who always had something in her pocket gum, a pen, a small notebook with scribbled jokes. Once she offered me one, joking. I saved the good ones for hard cases. I just nodded and kept walking. At lunch, I stepped outside, my breath visible in the freezing air. That's when the phone buzzed. Voicemail from a number I hadn't saved, but I knew the voice instantly. "Son, it's time to stop living in shadows. You need to marry again. The kids need stability." Pay. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered on the concrete. I didn't bother listening again. My father hadn't changed. Growing up in Winterlight Hollow had always felt like being buried under snow, quiet, heavy, and suffocating. My mother died when I was 5. I remember the cold hospital room, the way Dad looked at her like she was already fading before she was gone. And then, just months later, Camilla arrived. With her too bright lipstick, her new curtains, her new rules. My mom's photos disappeared. Her books were boxed up. Camilla called it starting fresh. I called it erasing her. Later that afternoon, after picking up the kids and dropping Nova's glove again on the way upstairs, I packed them into the car and drove to the cemetery. The grave was on the far side, past the rows of older stones, in a quiet corner surrounded by leafless trees and a rusted iron fence. The grass had yellowed for winter and the wind carried a bite. Nova played with a dandelion puff nearby, while Elliot knelt beside me, placing a toy camera on the headstone. "She can still see it, right?" he asked. I nodded, afraid my voice would crack if I spoke. "I don't know how to move on without betraying you," I whispered to the stone. "You left too soon, Mara. I'm trying, but it all feels wrong." When we got home, a letter was waiting for me on the floor. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a short note in my father's handwriting. "I'll be in Ridgewater next week. We need to talk." I poured myself a drink. The whiskey burned going down, warming the same place in my chest that had gone cold since the day I held Mara's hand for the last time. I thought of the way Dad told me, "Crying won't bring her back." I had cried anyway, alone in my room, hiding the sound. I was afraid of becoming the man who had told his son to grow up instead of letting him grieve. Later that night, as I folded laundry, Elliot came to me again. "If you get a new wife," he asked, staring at his socks, "would she be our new mom?" I crouched down, his face so close to mine. "Nobody can replace your mom. She'll always be your mom. That's never changing." He nodded, but his eyes were still unsure. I pulled him into a hug and didn't let go for a long time. After the kids went to bed, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at a photo on the wall. The 3 of us, Mara, Elliot, and me, taken before Nova was born. Mara had a smear of chocolate on her cheek. Her smile was wide and bright. I reached up and touched the glass. "They think I'm broken," I muttered to the quiet. "Maybe I am." The wind outside howled against the windows. I stayed there, frozen in the dim hallway light, listening, hoping for something, anything. But the only thing that answered was silence. The next day came with the same gray skies and cold air, as if Ridgewater didn't know how to be anything else. I spent the morning restlessly pacing the apartment, glancing at the clock every few minutes. I hadn't responded to my father's letter, but deep down, I knew he'd show up anyway. That was how he operated. Push through, act like permission was implied. The knock came just after lunch. Not loud, not hesitant, just 3 even taps on the door. When I opened it, there he was. Daniel Corbin, my father, standing in the hallway in his long wool coat, looking like he had stepped out of another decade. His hair had gone almost entirely gray since I'd last seen him, and his face looked worn, not fragile, just more weathered, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. He gave a stiff nod. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome," he said. "You're not," I replied flatly, opening the door only halfway. There was a moment of quiet between us. He glanced past me, probably catching sight of Nova's toy blocks scattered across the living room. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without answering. Inside, the apartment felt smaller with him in it. His presence filled the space in a way I hadn't expected. The kids were in the bedroom, napping. I kept my voice low as I led him to the kitchen. He brought a bag with him, and when he opened it, he pulled out 2 old toy trucks, metal ones from my own childhood. "Thought they might like these," he said. "They were yours, once." Dinner that evening was awkward, to say the least. Elliot was curious and polite, unsure how to address this stranger who smiled too much and asked too many questions. Nova clung to her stuffed bear and stared. Daniel tried his best. He told a silly story about me as a kid getting my foot stuck in a fence, and to my surprise, the kids laughed. I said little, watching, barely touching my food. I didn't want this man slipping into their lives like it was easy, like it was normal. After they went to bed, I found myself in the living room, arms crossed, while he stood by the window. The city lights flickered dimly through the foggy glass. "You don't have to live like this, Liam," he said quietly. "It's okay to move forward. The kids need you whole." I let the words hang for a moment. "Like you did?" I asked, voice sharp. "Weeks after Mom died, you moved on, married someone else. Brought her into our home and acted like it was all okay." "She helped me heal," he replied, not turning around. Camilla made me smile again. "That's not a crime." "No, but forgetting Mom was," I said. "And making me invisible in my own home was worse." He turned to face me then, his jaw tight. "You're just afraid to love again." I took a step forward, fists clenched at my sides. "No, I'm afraid to make my kids feel the way I felt, pushed aside, silenced, made to smile for someone who wasn't their mother. That's what I'm afraid of." The room fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. His expression darkened, then softened. "You think I didn't see you hurting, but I did," he said. "I just didn't know how to fix it." "You didn't try. You just replaced her and expected me to do the same." He didn't respond. Instead, he picked up his coat and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he placed a cardboard box on the coffee table. "This is for you," he said. "Just look at it when you're ready." And then he was gone. I didn't touch the box that night. I sat in the silence, staring at it like it might explode. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to remember that maybe, just maybe, he had cared more than I thought. I finally went to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, as I got Elliot ready for school, he tugged on my sleeve. "Why did you and Grandpa Daniel fight?" I paused. "Because sometimes grown-ups don't know how to talk without yelling," I said gently. "But we're trying." He nodded slowly. "I liked his story. You were kind of funny when you were little." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess I was." At work later, the day dragged. The warehouse was the same, noisy, dim, full of cold metal and dull tasks. I moved crates without focus. During lunch, I sat in the break room alone until Harper walked in. She glanced at me, then sat nearby. "You don't talk about her much," she said softly. I looked up. "What?" "Your wife. I lost someone too. I know what it's like to carry a name like a wound. If you ever want to talk, vent, or scream, I'm around." I didn't answer. I just nodded slightly and got up to leave. That night, after the kids were asleep, I finally opened the box. Inside was a photo album, the cover worn soft from years of use. I opened the first page and froze. It was a photo I didn't know existed. Mara and me, sitting on a dock at the lake, her head on my shoulder, the sun setting behind us. Page after page held pictures from our time together. Birthdays, lazy mornings, the first time Elliot crawled. Mixed among them were photos of just me and the kids, some recent, some from times I didn't remember anyone being around to take them. He had been watching, from a distance maybe, but watching all the same. I sat on the couch, flipping slowly, tears slipping down my face without sound. In the last photo, Mara stood in the kitchen, flour on her nose, holding up a pancake shaped like a star. She looked alive. So alive. I closed the album and held it to my chest. "You were watching, even then?" I whispered to the empty room. There was no answer, but for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't hurt as much. It was early Saturday morning when I packed the kids into the car and started the drive toward Winterlight Hollow. I hadn't really planned it. One moment I was looking at the photo album Daniel left behind, and the next I was checking the weather for the mountain roads. Snow had already started falling up there. I hesitated more than once, my hand hovering over the ignition, wondering what good could possibly come from digging up old ghosts. But something in Elliot's voice when he talked about Grandpa Daniel stuck with me. Maybe it was time. Not for Daniel's sake, but maybe for mine. Maybe for the kids. The road twisted tightly around hills, the snow growing thicker the higher we climbed. Towering pines lined both sides of the highway, branches heavy with ice. Everything looked hushed and still, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Nova babbled in the back seat, pointing at every snow-covered tree, as if each one was a discovery. Elliot was quiet, staring out the window, eyes wide as the world changed from concrete to white wilderness. When we pulled into the gravel driveway of the old house, my stomach twisted. Nothing had changed. The paint on the siding was still chipped in the same places. The porch swing creaked lazily in the cold breeze. The same wind chimes hung by the door, faded copper and blue glass catching the sunlight, just like they had when I was 5. I remembered sitting under them after my mother's funeral, listening to their soft music and hoping she could still hear me. Daniel stepped out onto the porch as I killed the engine. He looked smaller here, framed by the old place, as though the house swallowed some of his sharp edges. "You made it," he said. "I said I would," I replied, helping Nova out of her car seat. She immediately reached for a snowflake that landed on her mitten. He opened the door and we stepped into a living room that felt like a time capsule. The same fireplace, the same worn rug, even the same ticking clock on the wall, but the photos were different. There were pictures of Camilla now, on mantels, shelves, in frames beside my mother's old ones. It was strange seeing both women staring out from the same space, their lives folded into one house. Later that afternoon, after hot chocolate and a hesitant catch-up, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table while the kids napped in the guest room. "Camilla passed a few years ago," he said suddenly, his eyes dropping to the mug in his hand. "Cancer." I didn't say anything. "She never stopped trying to be a mother to you," he added. I stared at him. "She was never my mother," I said. "She tried too hard." Or maybe I just wasn't ready to let someone else take that place. He nodded, quietly. Later, I bundled the kids up and took them down to the lake at the edge of the property. The walk was steep, and the snow crunched beneath our boots. The lake was frozen now, a sheet of ice with soft drifts along its edges. I hadn't been there in years. I pointed to a spot near the edge. "That's where your grandma pulled me on a sled," I told them. "I fell off right there," I added, chuckling. "Cried for an hour." Elliot grinned. "Did she carry you back?" "Yeah," I said. She did. That evening, Daniel made stew, same recipe my mom used to make. The smell alone brought a lump to my throat. We sat around the table, the kids telling him stories about school, Harper, and a stray cat they had named Buttons that lived behind the dumpster near our building. Then he said it. "You should think about their future, Liam. They need a woman in the house." The spoon slipped from my hand and hit the bowl with a dull thud. "They need me," I said slowly. "Whole, not patched up with some replacement." He held up his hands. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I snapped. "You always mean it like that." A long silence followed. The kids glanced nervously between us. I cleared my throat and changed the subject, asking Elliot about his snow fort, but the words stuck in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. That night, after I got the kids to bed, I stayed up alone in the guest room. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something older. On the shelf sat a box of things I hadn't seen in decades. I opened the lid and found a small music box, white with blue flowers on the lid. I turned the key underneath. The tune was faint and slow. It was my mother's. She used to play it for me when I was sick. When the first note hit, something cracked inside me. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, the music box beside me, and let the tears come. I didn't hear Elliot come in. He walked over quietly and sat beside me. "It's okay to cry, Dad," he whispered, placing his small hand on mine. "You always say it's okay for me." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Later, Daniel joined me by the fireplace. He didn't say much for a while, just stared at the flames. Then he spoke. "I didn't know how to be a dad and a widower," he said. "I chose survival, not love, and I'm sorry. I'm scared of becoming you," I said quietly. "Then talk, Feel, let yourself mess up, but don't shut out the people who care. The next morning, as we were packing, Harper called. I stepped outside to take it. Her voice was soft. Just checking in, she said. The world's quieter without you around. Thanks, I said, still figuring some things out. Grief doesn't vanish, she said. It just gets quieter. Sometimes. The kids were playing in the snow, laughing, throwing handfuls into the air. They built a snowman with a crooked smile and sticks for arms. Nova called it Mama's friend. I smiled. Maybe we'll visit again, I said aloud, more to myself than anyone else. Before leaving, I walked to the small cemetery near the edge of town where my mom was buried. The snow was deep, but I found the stone. I crouched and placed a folded note on top. Still trying, Mom, for them. And maybe, someday, for me too. As we pulled out of the driveway, the wind chimes on the porch sang again, just faintly, like a whisper on the air, and for the first time in years, I let them comfort me. Coming back to Ridgewater after Winterlight Hollow felt like stepping into a different kind of silence. The snow was still melting off the rooftops, leaving behind slush-filled sidewalks and dripping gutters. The apartment, though exactly how we had left it, somehow felt smaller. The shadows clung to the walls a little tighter. The air was heavier. Mara's coat still hung by the door, her scarf draped carelessly like it always was, untouched, like she might come back for it any second. I set the kids' bags down and began unpacking, folding their tiny clothes and tucking them back into drawers. In our bedroom, I paused at her side of the closet. Her favorite blue dress was still on its hanger. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. 2 days passed like that. I returned to my routine, but not fully. Mechanically moving through meals, bedtimes, and quick shifts at work, I skipped one of them without calling in. I wasn't surprised when I heard the knock on the door that evening. I hesitated before opening it, already knowing who it was. Harper stood there with a paper bag in one hand and a tired smile. You missed your shift, she said gently. I thought you might need company or a sandwich. I opened the door wider. You didn't have to, I said. I know, she replied, stepping in. The apartment was still cluttered from the tripped snow boots drying near the radiator. Mittens spread across the table. She glanced around like she was entering a museum filled with things people weren't supposed to touch. But she didn't ask questions or offer opinions. Instead, she handed me the bag. Inside was a sandwich, a bottle of juice, and a pack of cookies shaped like animals. Bribery, she added with a slight smirk. The kids peeked from the hallway. Nova, shy at first, stepped forward and placed a sticker on Harper's hand. A rainbow dinosaur! Harper played along, gasping like it was a treasure. Elliot followed, holding up a drawing. It's our mama, he said, flying with stars. Harper knelt beside him. She looks magical, she said softly. Did she like stars? She loved the night sky, I replied, the words coming from a quiet place inside me. Dinner was simple leftover soup. I reheated while Harper sat at the table, telling the kids a story about how she once tried to cook spaghetti and ended up with smoke alarms going off in 3 apartments. Elliot giggled so hard he nearly spilled his water. For a while, the room felt warm, almost alive again. After the kids went to sleep, we sat on the small balcony. The city was buzzing below us, distant sirens, a train rumbling in the distance, someone arguing on the sidewalk. It was oddly comforting. We didn't speak right away. Harper leaned back in the chair, her coat wrapped tightly around her. Are you scared you'll forget her? She asked finally, looking up at the stars. I nodded, terrified. I forget her voice sometimes. I close my eyes and I can't hear her laugh the way I used to. I hate it. She didn't say anything for a moment, then added, Grief doesn't come with instruction manuals. You just make it up as you go. I found myself laughing a little. That explains a lot. A pause passed between us. Then she nudged my arm. Also, I saw your fridge. I think your ketchup expired before Nova was born. Tragic, I know, I said. I had a gourmet chef until recently. Now it's me and my overachieving rice cooker. She smiled, and for a brief second, I forgot the constant ache. Later that night, after she left, I sat alone in the dark living room. The kids were asleep, the apartment quiet again. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my voicemails. I stopped at one near the top. It was old, dated just 2 days before Mara's final hospital visit. Don't forget to buy almond milk, Space Cadet, her voice said through a giggle. Love you! I played it 3 times, just to hear her laugh again. I couldn't delete it. That night in bed, the guilt returned. Letting someone else in, even just a little, felt wrong. Harper had sat where Mara once sat. She had made my children laugh. I wondered if I had let it go too far. Had I betrayed Mara in some small way just by letting someone else into our home? The next morning, a text came from Daniel. Short. Proud of you for opening a door, even if it's just a crack. I didn't reply, but I saved it. While I made breakfast, Elliot leaned against the counter, watching me crack eggs. I like Harper, he said suddenly. She laughs like Mama used to. The words struck deep. I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. He didn't seem to mind, he just went back to drawing at the table. Later that day, I called Harper. I can't promise anything, I said, my voice quiet, steady. Not now, maybe not ever. But I don't want to shut the door on someone just because I'm scared. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then, I'm not asking for promises. Just let me be a friend who doesn't need fixing. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't anything else to say. That evening, I stood by the window as the city lights flickered on one by one. The kids were coloring at the table, crayons scattered everywhere. Harper was reading them a silly poem in a loud, ridiculous voice, and they were laughing like it was the best thing they'd heard all week. I whispered to the glass, to the faint reflection of a man still learning how to breathe again. One step at a time, Mara. That's all I've got. It was the day after I'd finally told Harper I wasn't ready for promises when the past knocked, loud and unexpected, at my front door. I opened it to find Jessie standing there, Mara's sister, with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and red eyes that told me she'd been crying. Her long coat was dusted in light snow, and strands of her dark hair were stuck to her damp cheeks. She looked like someone who'd lost something they couldn't name, not just someone stopping by for a visit. I needed to see the kids, she said quietly, her voice barely above the wind behind her. I stood frozen for a second, unsure if I should hug her or close the door. We hadn't spoken since the funeral, not once, not because we hated each other, but because we didn't know how to stand in the same space without Mara between us. I didn't expect, I started, then stopped. Come in. She stepped inside and looked around like the walls might collapse at any moment. I watched her take in the familiar photos, the toys on the floor, and the worn spot on the couch where Mara used to curl up with a blanket and tea. Jessie's voice broke the silence. I thought if I stayed away, it would hurt less. It didn't, I said, sharper than I meant to. She flinched but didn't argue. I led her to the couch where Nova sat stacking plastic blocks. Elliot peeked from the hallway, his eyes going wide before he ran into Jessie's arms. She hugged him tightly, her fingers curling into the back of his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear too. Dinner was awkward. I made pasta, something easy, something I wouldn't burn. Jessie picked at her food while I filled the silence with questions about her job in Portland and the weather she hated there. She didn't answer most of them. Instead, she stared at me as I passed her the grated cheese. You look more like her now than you did when she was alive, she said. I blinked, caught off guard. That haunted kind of beautiful, she added. I gave a dry chuckle. Thanks, I guess. After the kids were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. The apartment lights were dimmed, the soft yellow glow giving everything a softer edge, like maybe the pain would hurt less in shadows, and that's when she brought it up. Harper! I heard about her, Jessie said, her voice like glass being set down too hard. You really think Mara would want someone else raising her kids? Her words sliced through me. My hands clenched around the cup. No one is raising them but me, I snapped. No one else reads their bedtime stories, or packs their lunches, or calms them down when they cry for their mom in the middle of the night? Jessie stood suddenly, backing away from the table. Her eyes were glassy. I don't want to lose the last piece of her, she said, her voice shaking. I already lost my sister. Don't shut me out too. I stared at her. My chest was tight with old anger and new guilt, both trying to win. I looked away. That night, instead of storming out, she pulled out one of Mara's journals from her bag. I took this the day of the funeral, she said. I shouldn't have, but I needed her words. We sat on the living room floor, reading softly from the worn pages. Mara's handwriting danced across each line, sometimes neat and flowing, sometimes rushed and smudged. Jessie read aloud, if anything happens to me, I just want Liam to live, really live. Not just for the kids, not just to survive, for himself. I didn't say anything, just kept staring at the words as if they'd change. Later, long after Jessie went to bed on the couch and the apartment had gone quiet again, I reread that line alone in my room. Really live. I whispered it aloud, but the words didn't feel like a gift. They felt like a curse. I wasn't sure I even knew what living meant anymore. Getting through each day without collapsing didn't count, did it? The next morning, I was back to silence. Harper texted me. Did I do something wrong? I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply. That night, Elliot screamed. I was there in seconds, rushing into his room. He was curled under his blanket, sobbing, his cheeks wet and red. Mama, he cried. I dreamed she left again. I pulled him into my arms and rocked him slowly. She's still with you, I whispered. Right here. I tapped my chest. You carry her inside you, even if you can't see her. That won't change. He sniffled and nodded, burying his face in my shirt. After he fell asleep, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. My eyes were tired. My face had more lines than I remembered. The stubble on my chin was uneven. I didn't look like a man rebuilding anything. I looked like a shadow holding on to kids who needed light. What if I'm just becoming that? I asked my reflection. A shadow with kids. No answer, of course. I went back to my phone. There were 3 half-written messages. One to Harper, one to Jessie, one to Daniel. Each one started with, "Sorry," or "I didn't mean to," or "I'm not sure what I'm doing." I deleted them all, and instead, I typed one word. To each of them. Tomorrow? I didn't know what it meant exactly. A question, a hope, maybe a promise that I'd try again when the sun came up. For now, it was enough. It was the next weekend when I finally went through with it. I texted them, Harper, Jessie, and Daniel, and asked them to meet me at Mapleview Park, the place where Mara had once thrown an autumn picnic that none of us forgot. The trees were starting to change, leaves gathering in gold and rust at the edges of the walking paths. The air was crisp, but not biting, just cold enough to keep your hands in your coat pockets and your thoughts close to your chest. There was a clearing on the north side of the park, just past the old playground, and tucked behind a grove of maple trees, where I'd spent that picnic watching Mara laugh with a cider cup in her hand and Elliot on her lap. I thought of that day often, how bright the world had felt back then. I hadn't been back since. I brought wood, matches, and a stack of kindling from our building's basement. Elliot and Nova helped me gather twigs while we waited. Harper was the first to arrive, wearing a knit hat too big for her head and carrying a paper bag with something tucked carefully inside. Jessie showed up next, walking slower than usual, her eyes puffy but steady. Daniel was last, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, his face unreadable as he nodded at me from a distance. No one asked why we were there, they just followed my lead. We built the bonfire in silence. The kids helped with the smaller sticks. Harper arranged the logs in a pyramid like she knew what she was doing, and Daniel didn't speak at all, just stacked the heavier pieces without a word. Jessie stood back, clutching something wrapped in tissue paper. When the pile was ready, Harper pulled out a small box of white candles and handed one to each of us. "One for each memory," she said gently. I raised an eyebrow. "You and your rituals," she gave me a crooked smile. "Better than your emotional constipation." I couldn't help but laugh. It felt strange letting laughter escape in a place like this, but no one stopped me. Jessie stepped forward and slowly unwrapped what she'd brought. It was one of Mara's old scarves, soft green with little embroidered stars along the edges. "I found it in her journal box," she said. "It still smells like her, like patchouli and vanilla." She held it close to her face for a moment, then handed it to me. She'd want it burned, not boxed. I nodded. My throat felt tight. "All right." I placed the scarf gently at the center of the kindling, tucked under the first few logs. Then I lit a match. As the first flame caught and crawled along the edge of the fabric, I closed my eyes and took a breath. "This isn't forgetting," I said, barely above a whisper. "This is carrying." The fire caught fast after that, flames licking up the sides of the wood, warming our circle. For a while, none of us spoke. The flames crackled, leaves rustled overhead. Nova tossed a handful of leaves into the air and squealed as they rained down around her. Elliot sat cross-legged in the grass, eyes fixed on the fire. Daniel stepped closer. His face was lit by the orange glow, lines deeper than I remembered. "I made mistakes," he said, "but I never stopped loving her. Or you." I didn't say anything back, but I didn't turn away either. It was the closest we'd ever come to peace. One by one, we began to share stories. Harper started, crouching near the fire. She helped me once when I had a flat tire. Middle of the rain, I was soaked, and Mara just pulled over, rolled up her sleeves, and said, "I don't trust roadside assistance, too slow." Harper smiled. She cursed like a sailor and hugged like a poet. Essie followed, eyes fixed on the flames. In high school, Mara once stayed up with me all night just because I was scared about a math test. She didn't know the answers either, but she made me laugh until I forgot to be afraid. Even Daniel offered something. "She used to sing while she cooked," he said, looking at the sky. Off-key, loud. It drove me nuts. But after she died, the house was too quiet. Then Elliot spoke. "She made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, but mine looked like a cloud." He giggled. "She said that meant mine was flying." Nova clapped her hands. "Mama Cloud!" she yelled. We all laughed. And for a moment, the mood changed. It was still sad, yes, but lighter somehow, like we were letting something go without losing it completely. When it was my turn, I stood. The wind picked up just enough to make the flames dance higher. I looked at the people in front of me, each one tied to Mara in some way, each one holding part of my life now. "She once told me that grief is a door, not a dead end," I said. I didn't believe her, still don't, some days. But I think maybe she was right. If this is a door, I've been standing at the threshold for too long. No one clapped. No one spoke. And that was better. We all just stood there, watching the fire as it began to burn lower. The embers glowed like little stars falling into ash. The silence between us was heavy but not empty. It was full of meaning, of release, of things none of us could say aloud but still understood. As the flames died down, Daniel stepped toward me. He opened his arms awkwardly, like he wasn't sure I'd accept. I didn't make it easy, but I let him hug me. It was stiff, rough around the edges, but it meant something. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trying." "I'm still mad," I said back, my voice low. He nodded. "You have every right to be." Later, Harper walked home with me. The kids were half asleep in the stroller, bundled in scarves and old jackets. The sidewalk glistened under the streetlights, the air smelling faintly of smoke and pine. "You ever think about a parenting class?" she asked casually. I looked at her, surprised. "Why? You think I need help?" She grinned. "We all do," I laughed. "All right, I'll bring whiskey, you bring patience." That night, after the kids were in bed and the house was still again, I walked to the bookshelf in the hallway. Mara's favorite book had been sitting in a box for months, along with other things I hadn't known what to do with. I took it out, ran my hand over the cover, and found a place for it on the shelf, not hidden, not placed like some shrine, just there. Part of our home. "You'll always have a place here," I whispered. Then I turned off the light and walked into the quiet. This time, it didn't feel quite so lonely. Told you the house just wanted a proper finale.